This is the Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio. And now, Eric John Phelps.
Welcome. And I'm going to say welcome to the broadcast today here at 24/7 World Radio. With your host, Brother Eric John Phelps, coming live and direct from the bustling metropolis of Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, with our one-stop light. Amen. So, thankful to be here, and I trust this broadcast will be a blessing to you today. This broadcast is the ministry of Reformation Bible Puritan Baptist Church, of which I am the elder bishop by office and pastor teacher by gift. This broadcast is for the spiritual and temporal benefit of my people, the minority Caucasian races of the world, including the Angles, Saxons, Celts, Slavs, Teutons, Franks, Normans, Scotch-Irish, and every other branch of the white Caucasian race. Concerning spiritual matters, this broadcast is for the edification of white men in preaching the gospel to unsaved white men, that they too may obtain salvation in the Lord Jesus Christ, the risen Son of God, God manifest in the flesh, King of the Hebrew Jewish Israelites, and the great God and Savior of the church, that is the body of Christ, to the exclusion of Satan's Jesuit-ruled, religio-political, papal Roman Catholic institution, seated in Rome, that great city and great whore, which rules over the kings of the earth, pursuant to Revelation 17, verse 18. Spiritually, this broadcast is also for the growth and maturity of white men in Christ, that we may continue to work out our salvation in fear and trembling, knowing that it is our holy God, the Father of the risen Lord Jesus Christ, with whom we have to do. Concerning temporal, political, cultural matters, this broadcast is also for the preservation of the racially white, Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Slavic, Protestant, and Baptist peoples, historically used by God to break the power of the Pope's murderous and warring Dark Ages. They're not the Middle Ages. They're the Dark Ages. That bloody disgrace to the history of man, having spanned 1,000 years from AD 606 to 1648. We shall be reminded that Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist Calvinists began the Protestant Reformation, which birthed the modern era in 1648, with the Peace Treaty of Westphalia ending the Black Pope's 30 Years' War, waged from 1618 to 1648. Therefore, a defense will be made for the preservation of the minority, white Caucasian, Old Calendar, Orthodox Christian, Protestant Christian, and Baptist Christian peoples against our plotted racial, linguistic, cultural, historical, and national destruction by Rome, implemented by her Anglo-American international white power structure. Indeed, this white power structure, run by the Pope, this international white power structure, I lost my place. We say, okay, well, we shall be reminded that Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist Calvinists began the Protestant Reformation, which birthed the modern era in 1648, with the Peace Treaty of Westphalia ending the Black Pope's 30 Years' War, waged from 1618 to 1648. Therefore, a defense will be made for the preservation of the minority, white Caucasian, Old Calendar, Orthodox Christian, Protestant Christian, and Baptist Christian peoples against our plotted racial, linguistic, cultural, historical, and national destruction by Rome, implemented by her Anglo-American international white power structure. This is out of Washington, and this is out of London. These white men who rule the world are doing it for the benefit of the papacy. That's why they're all members of the Council on Foreign Relations or Chatham House, Royal Institute of International Affairs. They're busy doing the bidding of the Pope, which includes the King of England, that wicked Charles. They're all working together, subject to the Pope, whom the Jesuits have made the universal monarch of the world in practicality so far. This white power structure, using the mass-murdering anti-Christ, anti-Reformation Bible religions of Shia, Sunni, and Wahhabi Islam, socialist communism, and socialist fascism, that's right, they're religions, its traitorous leaders secretly working together is directed by high-level Freemasons loyal to the Antichrist Pope of Rome, as well as the Paper Caesar's international white power structure, imposing Antichrist, unbiblical, socialist communist policies, resulting in forced amalgamation. That's forced race mixing. That's evil and wicked. Subsequent racial miscegenation. Now we're going to have these offspring of all these mongrel mulattoes as a result of this forced miscegenation, which peoples can never sustain Western civilization. That's why the Jesuits are doing it. And their Masonic lodges. Without the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the Jesuits would not have the success that they have. So we have subsequent racial miscegenation resulting in irreversible hybridization. Pro-black, pro-Hispanic, pro-Muslim. I remember on Time magazine many years ago, they said, here's the new America, and it's going to be a combination of whites and mulattoes and blacks and Asians and Spanish. Oh, there was a picture of each one of those kinds of people on the front of, what was it, Life magazine? No, it was, I think it was Time. It was Time. Who runs that? The Pope, the Knights of Malta. Henry Luce ran Time magazine for years, involved in the cover-up assassination of JFK. And so, their whole purpose is to race mix and miscegenate what was once Anglo-Saxon, white Protestant America, so that it will be a Roman miscegenated empire where all power will be in the commander-in-chief, the Roman Caesar, as he is subject to the Pope or Roman. The peoples of the empire will be virtually unable to resist the tyranny out of Washington run by the Pope. They have nothing in common. There's no racial comedy. There's no religious anything in common religiously. There's nothing in common. So they have nothing to unite around. That's the reason for it. Resulting in irreversible hybridization, pro-black, pro-Hispanic, pro-Muslim, anti-white male government discrimination, massive black on white, Hispanic on white crime, and international genocide of said historic white Protestant nations by cleverly incited and orchestrated world wars, further destroying Western civilization born out of the Lord's Protestant Reformation. Further, a defense will be made for the preservation of the grand and glorious white Protestant Reformation, including the high and lofty and rhythmic and beautiful white language of English, enshrined in the AV 1611 Bible, and used by the one triune God to evangelize all the nations of the earth with English-speaking peoples, especially the British, Australian, Canadian, and American Caucasian peoples. During the last 500 years, God has used white men to get the gospel to the ends of the earth, primarily. We translated the Bible. We put it in the common language of the different nations. God has used white men to do this. Hence, white men are the target of racial annihilation by this government and all the other governments of Western civilization that the Jesuits run. The Netherlands, Germany, England, Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, all historic white Protestant nations forcibly now being race mixed and miscegenated with blacks and half-blacks, Arabs coming out of the Middle East, to miscegenate all these nations to kill off and die down any white nations, because it's only these nations, historically speaking, that have ever successfully resisted both the spiritual and temporal power, political power of the Pope of Rome. So we got to get rid of these people. Further, this broadcast calls for the voluntary separation of white, Reformation, Bible-believing, and anti-Roman papacy. That's pro-Julian calendar, anti-Jesuit Gregorian calendar, anti-World Council of Churches. Remember, the Pope runs the World Council of Churches. Any Protestant church that's a member of the World Council of Churches is serving the Pope. And I will guarantee you all those Protestant churches and Baptist churches, because there are some Baptist churches that are a member of it, all of them have departed from the Reformation Bible. There's not one holding to the Reformation Bible, be it the Geneva or the King James or any of the Reformation Bibles translated from the historic Textus Receptus, that these churches are using. They're all apostate. They've departed from the Reformation Bible, and they've also now refused to call the papacy the dynasty of the Antichrist or the Pope the Antichrist. When you depart from the Reformation Bible, you no longer call the Pope the Antichrist. Going on. Old calendar Orthodox Christians, Protestant Christians, and Baptist Christians to the establishment of a new racially white nation. We have the right to preserve our race somewhere here in North America. And you call that racism, I call you an idiot. You're a racist. You're a bigot. You're the one that doesn't want any white people having their own identity preserved, especially white Protestants and Baptists. We can't have that identity preserved, can we? You got to get rid of their race, got to get rid of their historic Protestant history, got to get rid of it all because that's racist, bigoted, and prejudiced. You're a bigot. You're racist. And you're prejudiced. You hate white people. And there's some of you white people that are listening. You're self-loathing people that hate yourselves. The Lord rebuke you, and it's time to repent. We're going to establish a new white nation within Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, she having declared her independence from FDR's Jesuitical de facto military government of the United States, cleverly imposed by Presidential Proclamations 2039-2040, approved and confirmed by Congress since March 9, 1933. This Jesuitical military government of the United States and the military government in Harrisburg have all been imposed by the commander-in-chief in Washington, and it's these military governments that are continually and ceaselessly destroying the white-raced peoples of North America, and especially Protestants and Baptists. That's what the Pope's military government's done for you. White men, white ministers of the gospel, white educators, white academics. That's what it's done for you. Do you like that? You like your children being ashamed that they're white and that they're woke? Huh? It's going to continue until you start to do something about it. Till you start to cry out against it. I call these people that are doing that to us a bunch of racists and bigots, and it's going to stop. And that goes for all these big corporations run by the Pope. Constant advertising, all black advertising, or now Hispanic advertising. Very few white people being advertised in any of their business things. I went to Chase Bank in Houston a year or so ago. Not one white individual was being advertised in a poster. These big banks, these big corporations, shoving black supremacy and Hispanic supremacy down our throats. These white people here, when we founded this country and we built it. But we can't have one anymore. It ought to make you angry, white man. But angry enough not to be a sucker to go into the new right with Donald Trump and Roger Stone and Steve Bannon and all those other Roman Catholics. That's right, Trump is a Catholic. It's time we not be played for suckers. We want to preserve what's ours, what God has given to us. And so we need a new nation for it. Anybody with me? Any of you white men want to spend your money and help to that end? Because it's going to take some money to do it. Going on. That new nation to be called Protestant to the exclusion of all other races except the racial Hebrew Jewish Israelites. Being AB 1611, Bible-believing, gun-owning, white Caucasian nationalists, we desire to enjoy God's promised blessing of Genesis 12:1-3. As we bless Abraham's physical seed through Isaac and Jacob, which racial descendants may voluntarily live among us while preserving their own Hebrew race, defined in the scripture of truth as quote-unquote the holy seed and quote-unquote the holy people. And that's because of the Abrahamic covenant. We then seek the arrival of the Pope's political control over blessed Jerusalem, the city of the great King, quote-unquote, the risen Lord Jesus Christ, which includes the removal of the Pope's Council on Foreign Relations-led Masonic, Sunni Islamic, historically pro-Nazi Arab leaders, as well as his CFR-led, historically pro-Nazi Socialist Communist Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists. Did you realize Haj Amin al-Husseini was the personal guest of Adolf Hitler in Berlin for 4 years, from 1941 to 45? And he got along quite well with the fanatical Sunni Muslims, which these other Sunnis, when the British made Haj Amin al-Husseini the head of Jerusalem, head of Islam in Jerusalem, a mufti there, they said, you've appointed a thug. Well, that's what the Jesuits want. They want thugs leading Islam. But that will obey the Pope. And the Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists, you realize that Rudolf Kastner was involved in the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust as he aided and abetted Kurt Becker and Adolf Eichmann in the roundup of somewhat 400,000 or more Hungarian Jews, sending them to Auschwitz. That was Rudolf Kastner. David Ben-Gurion put him in his administration. He was later assassinated by Mossad or Shin Bet on his doorstep. But they're all working together, folks. They're working together. The Labor Zionists, Masonic Jewish Labor Zionists, and the Masonic Arab Muslims, all working together at the top under the Pope. Both sides covertly working together in dividing the Lord's promised land given to Jacob and his physical racial descendants in Genesis 28, verses 12 through 15. For these modern-day Freemasonic, quote, Islamic assassins and Roman Catholic Knights Templars, unquote, rule Rome's revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, just like they did before. The Latin kingdom of Jerusalem that was established in 1099 and was done away with, destroyed in 1291 by the Muslims, the Mamelukes. The Knights Templars and the Shia assassins worked together during the Kingdom of Jerusalem, just like they do now, the Sunni assassins. And so, these modern-day Freemasonic Islamic assassins, Roman Catholic Knights Templars, rule Rome's revived, quote, Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, namely Israel, for the benefit of the Jesuit White Pope, Antichrist Francis I, overseen by the Jesuit Black Pope, Arturo Sosa, and to the obvious detriment of the Hebrews living therein. The Jewish people living in Israel suffer because of its government. They always suffer because of it. And they know that government, loyal to the Pope, will never do anything truly helpful in furthering the sovereignty of that nation. They'll never do it. Lastly, this broadcast will seek to expose the universal power of Satan's anti-Reformation Bible, counter-Reformation, pro-cartel capitalist, pro-socialist communist, socialist fascist military company of Jesus, which are the revived Knights Templars. Back in a moment, 24/7 World Radio.
This is 24/7 World Radio, and you're listening to The Eric John Phelps Show.
This is Brother Nicholas. Join me every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the German Bible Truth Hour and at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Dutch Bible Truth Hour on 24/7 World Radio. This is Bruder Nicholas. Ich lade euch herzlich ein, mich anzuhören jeder Dienstag um 2 Uhr nachmittags, amerikanische Zeit, für die deutsche Bibelwahrheitsstunde und 3 Uhr amerikanische Standardzeit für die niederländische Bibelwahrheitsstunde am World Radio 24/7. Dit is broeder Nico. U bent hartelijk uitgenodigd om elke dinsdag om 2 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Duitse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen en 3 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Nederlandse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen op 24/7 World Radio.
This is The Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio.
Brother John Phelps back with the broadcast. Continuing on now with this broadcast today, and I've never preached a message like this before. It's a little different, but it has to do with keeping the traditions of our forefathers, of our white Protestant and Baptist forefathers of the last 500 years. Remember, the Baptists predate the Protestants. Okay. We're before them. Baptists are not Protestants. However, we've made common cause with the Protestants in the Bible that we read, because without the Protestants, Puritans, there is no King James Bible. There is no John Reynolds that approaches King James I and requests a new translation for the kingdom. That was done by Protestant Puritans. Another reason why the Jesuits hate the Puritans. So much so that they would fashion the Salem witch trials to blame the Puritans for that when the Jesuits did it secretly. Because Wiley tells us, James A. Wiley tells us that the Jesuits were masquerading as Puritans wherever they could get away with it. And they most assuredly penetrated Massachusetts to do away with that Puritan colony. So they hate the Puritans. They hate men who believe in the sovereignty of God. They hate men who deny the free will of man. The man in and of himself participates in his salvation. They hate him. They hate us. And so we Bible-believing men of God, in seeking to preserve right doctrine and the history of the Reformation and cultures and civilizations born out of the Reformation, which have been the highest civilizations in world history, the most peaceful civilizations in world history, unless some Jesuit got in control of our government and used our government to foment a war, like it did with King George III, making a war against these white Protestant colonies. Even Maryland was Protestant. That's right. So we just seek to preserve our history, our culture, all the advancements that we've made, and we can't do it if we depart from certain traditions. And by the way, one of our traditions is we never interracially married. We never interracially married with blacks. That's what the Catholics did. Protestants definitely did not do that, believing that God created the races to keep mankind separate, and therefore honoring God, we're not going to miscegenate and marry out of our race. So we are to keep certain traditions. And so we read in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 15, we read, "Therefore, brethren, stand fast." That's a military term. That's the term that a centurion would command his 100 soldiers underneath him when they were ready to engage in battle in their particular squares of formation that they were in. They were never to break formation. "Stand fast and hold the traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle." We're to stand fast because this is a war. And we're under attack by the devil and his great first cause, the papacy, run by the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. We're every day attacked by this war machine. We're attacked in our race. We're attacked in our history. We're attacked in the Bible that we use. We're attacked in the doctrine that we espouse. We're attacked in everything. And the very institutions and schools that were set up to further teach the gospel and to evangelize the American Indians and their Indians been usurped by the Jesuits. Harvard's one of them. And Mather set up Harvard. But we can't have any truly evangelistic university anymore that's Protestant and Puritan and Calvinistic. We can't have that now, can we? Well, you might get some civilization, some prosperity, some blessing from God. So they're ceaselessly and constantly attacking us, to the end that the counter-reformation of the Jesuit order would destroy the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Reformation and all the peoples, the posterity that have come to enjoy this historically white Protestant Western civilization. The Jesuits hate written constitutions. It limits the power of their government. A constitution is a Protestant Presbyterian form of government. Didn't arise in the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic had no constitution. And it's not a communist republic, because the communist republics, even though they have their little constitutions like the Russian Constitution, they still are absolute despotisms overseen by the Jesuits. They hate written historical Protestant governmental documents like the Constitution, the Federalist, and others, to further bring us into the Pope's Dark Ages with absolutism over our once great nations. And so they had to do two things. They had to get us to abandon the Reformation Bible. When they got us to abandon the Reformation Bible, there's no one on this radio station who's going to read from anything but the King James. If you are, and I find out about it, you're off. I had to correct Bowser about it. He went to the King James, but if I find out you're not reading from the King James, it's over. Go join some apostate church that's not using the King James. So they got the Protestants and the Baptists through the clever scheme of revising the Bible and making it better, quote unquote. And they started that in England in around the mid-1800s. They also started it in Germany in the 1700s with higher criticism. Higher criticism is the doctrine of evolution applied to the Bible. And they got the Lutheran Church to depart from the Luther Bible. They got the Presbyterian Church to depart from the King James Bible. They got the Anglican Church to depart from the King James Bible. They got most of your Baptist churches to depart from the King James Bible. There's a few that haven't. And then they've created a sect or a cult called the King James only people, that you cannot add light or clarification to the King James text, that you're just going to take every word like it is. And if you don't do that, you're a heretic. Well, there's a whole lot of people that believe that, including Anderson and others. If you don't hold the King James word for word, and you want to make any clarification why you're a heretic, you don't hold the King James Bible. Oh, yes, we do. And by the way, you read the Puritans' dedication to the reader, and they'll tell you that it was their most accurate that they did, and there are places for improvement or places for clarification. Puritans never believed that. Stephen Anderson, that heretic. And I'll have to say this too, even though Peter Ruckman did so many good things, he was a heretic too. He said that the English corrected the Greek. That is a heretic. And if you don't believe that you can clarify certain places in the King James Bible for your preaching or understanding, and you don't need a Strong's or a Young's Concordance or an interlinear or an interlinear Greek text or some other Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words. If you don't believe you can use these two tools to better preach and understand the AB 1611, you're a heretic. You believe in King James onlyism, and that's heresy. There are places that it needs clarification. I was approached one time by a guy at the first conspiracy conference that I had in 2002, and he came up to me and says, "Do you believe in correcting the King James Bible?" I said, "No, I don't. I believe in clarifying it. We don't need another translation. We just need a priest." And there are certain places that you want to clarify, like the little word baptizo. It means to immerse. So baptism by pouring and baptism by sprinkling is not biblical baptism. And we clarify the word baptize with the underlying word. So you have these King James only heretics, and the Jesuits are behind that too, to make a bad name for the AV 1611 Bible. Going on. They got us to depart from our Reformation English Bible, saying that the oldest manuscripts are the best, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and blah, 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 blah. Chris Pinto did a very good job in one of his videos, one of his CDs that he has. It's actually audio that you can watch it, DVDs. And he tells you that Tischendorf, who discovered Sinaiticus, was sent there by a cardinal from the Vatican. It's in the Vatican's best interest to exalt these old corrupted manuscripts as a justification and to replace the Textus Receptus and all translations out of that. This is all papacy. And these translations, quote unquote, are pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate. The scriptures in the eyes of the Jesuits. You need to get some good works on the preservation of the scriptures. Get our authorized Bible vindicated by Wilkinson and a few others. Which Bible by David Otis Fuller. Get established in why you read the AV 1611. And that it is the book that God has blessed for over 400 years in the taking of the gospel to the ends of the earth. It's this book that was translated into over 160 languages and dialects. so that the evangelists, I don't want to call them missionaries, so that the evangelists took the gospel to the ends of the earth with a translation that they used, and they were white evangelists. These were Anglos and Saxons. These Germans took the Bible and evangelized the portions of Africa. That's why there were German colonies in Africa. So the Jesuits had to get us to abandon our Reformation Bible, which they have done. That's why all these Protestant churches today, including the Lutherans, especially the Lutherans, as well as the Presbyterians and all the others, are apostate and powerless and worthless and fruitless. And because they're fruitless, according to John 15, men are going to take them and they're going to gather them up and they're going to burn them. It doesn't mean they'll lose their salvation for those that are saved, but it means they're going to destroy these churches that have gone apostate and departed from the King James Bible or the Reformation Bible in their language. So they're fruitless, and therefore God is going to purge them. And that's exactly what he did with the Lutheran Church in World War II. You people want to depart from the Luther Bible, and your leaders want to align with the Catholic leaders that are backing Hitler. If you want to do that, I will destroy your Lutheran Church. And that's exactly what happened in World War II. That's the only way to understand the firebombing of a non-military target called Dresden. Four square mile firestorm. Dresden had the most extant library on the Reformation in Germany. It was a Protestant city. You know why it happened? You know why they destroyed the Church of Our Lady, which was Luther's church? Because of the apostasy of the Lutheran Church, uniting up with the papacy with a common apostate Bible. And then the Lutheran Church would participate and not cry out against the Pope's Eurasian Jewish Holocaust. They departed from the Reformation Bible, which led to the destruction of their cultures. Why do you think St. Paul's Cathedral was allowed to be bombed by the Nazis? Why do you think God allowed that? Or maybe caused it to happen? Because St. Paul's Cathedral was an apostate Anglican church in London, departing from the Reformation English Bible, and so God just bombed the place. You don't want to be separate from the papacy. You don't want to denounce the papacy. You don't want to hold to the Reformation Bible. I will destroy your churches. And what do you think's coming here? So the first great sin of the Lord's people, late 1700s, 1800s, was the departure from the Reformation Bible. And by 1900, the English Revised Version of 1885 had begun to replace the King James Bible in England. That's the beginning of the end of the British Empire. We're making this relevant. And in America, in 1901, they came out with the American Standard Version, which is translated from the same corrupted Greek text. Eberhard Nessel, Kurt Aland, Westcott and Hort, all those papal heretics. We're going to have an English Bible based upon that heretical pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate Greek text, or Latin text, pardon me. The Roman Catholic Bible. And it's interesting that in 1901, McKinley's assassinated, and the man who's put in power is brother Freemason Theodore Roosevelt. And that's the first American emperor of what would be the American Empire. Depart from this Bible, I'll give you over to the papists and their military government in 1933. Depart from this Bible, I will give you over to Masonic traitors and assassins subject to the Jesuits. You depart from this Bible, I will destroy your culture. And that's what's happening today. So the first great sin of the Protestants and the Baptists was a departure from the Reformation Bible, and there were only a handful of men that held to it. In America, most of them were in the historic white Protestant and Baptist South, which had it not been for that region of the country, we'd have been completely under papal control. 50 years before it went under control in 1933. The second great sin that we did, that our forefathers did, is we stopped calling the papacy Antichrist. And this is unfortunately one of the deeds of dispensational premillennialism. And don't tell me that John Nelson Darby started it when I can show you John Gill talking about the rapture in his commentary on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 when he wrote in the 1600s, 100 years or so, or 1700s, 100 years before John Nelson Darby. Departed from calling the papacy the dynasty of the Antichrist. And with that, further facilitated our destruction. Back in a moment, 24/7 World Radio for the Eric John Phelps.
This is 24/7 World Radio, and you're listening to The Eric John Phelps Show. This is The Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio.
Phelps back with the two terrible errors and sins against God that we white Protestants and Baptists have committed over the last 150 years, maybe 200. The first being a departure from the Reformation Bible, from that magical book. From that book, the Spirit of God uses to convict men of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And so as a result, when we did that, the natural thing to follow is to no longer call the papacy Antichrist. Now, I realize that John Wycliffe is the father of the doctrine that the papacy is the Antichrist. I realize that. And of course, that's not true. We know that the Antichrist, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of 1 John 2 and 1 John 4 is a man. It's not an institution. We know that. But as I've shown previously on many broadcasts, that every pope is an Antichrist. The papacy is the dynasty of the Antichrist, and the final pope of Rome, the seventh Roman Caesar, will be slain with a sword, risen from the dead to be the Antichrist, the eighth Roman Caesar, yet of the seven, Revelation 17:10, who will rule the world for a literal 42 months, the last half of the future 70th week of Daniel, because there's a gap of time between the 69th and the 70th week, period. So, what we're going to do is, we're going to start going easy on the Pope. We'll even call him Christian. And if you read Hislop's The Two Babylons, written around 1850 thereabouts, he'll tell you that the papacy is nothing more than Babylon, and that the Pope is Nimrod. It's the religion of Nimrod and his wife. It's called The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. You have to have it for your library. Never been refuted. And so we're going to start going easy on the papacy. Now, here's what Luther said about the papacy. Now, remember, for the Jesuits to counter the Reformation, they have to bring despite and shame on the reformers. We have to bring despite and shame on Luther and on Calvin particularly. And I will deal with Calvin in another broadcast, that he never, ever asked Servetus to come to Geneva, and that when Servetus, the Unitarian, the one sent by the papacy to overthrow the Republic, the Protestant Republic of Geneva, he was rightfully put to death for conspiracy to destroy Geneva. And I will read to you from Wiley's great work, The History of Protestantism, where he shows why Servetus was put to death. He wasn't put to death for what he believed. He was put to death for what he was seeking to do. And Wiley, who wrote in 1878 in one of his volumes telling you all about it, is never quoted by any of these quote-unquote Protestant ministers in vindicating John Calvin and his leadership of Geneva. So, Jesuits have to attack the reformers. They have to attack the reformers, and they have because the reformers called the papacy the Antichrist. Now you have the Westminster Confession of Faith in 1648. This is after the 30 Years' War. And in this particular Westminster Confession of Faith, it's the old one, not the new one that has taken this out. They call the Pope Antichrist. We're on page 109 of chapter 25, paragraph 6. There is no other head of the church but the Lord Jesus Christ, nor can the Pope of Rome in any sense be head thereof, but is that Antichrist, that man of sin and son of perdition, that exalteth himself in the church against Christ and all that is called God. So, the Westminster Confession of Faith called the Pope the Antichrist. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, considered to be the prince of preachers in England, he called the Pope the Antichrist. He has a sermon called Geese in Their Hoods, and he says there's no peace with Rome. That was Spurgeon, at least in his earlier days. He lives between last half of the 19th century. So, we're going to depart from the scriptures, and then the preachers are going to go apostate. Here's what Luther had to say about the papacy. This is in Dowling's great work, History of Romanism. This is what Luther had to say. Luther quailed not before these papal thunders, which for centuries had made the mightiest monarchs tremble on their thrones. On the 6th of October, he published his famous tract on the Babylonian captivity of the church. He commences this work by ironically stating all the advantages for which he is indebted to his enemies. Quote, whether I will or no, unquote, says he, quote, I learn more and more every day, urged on as I am by so many celebrated masters. 2 years ago, I attacked indulgences, but with such faltering indecision that for then I had to roll forward the rock by myself, unquote. He then returns thanks to Dr. Eck and to his other adversaries. Quote, I denied, quote, he continues, quote, that the papacy was from God, but admitted that it stood by human right. But now, after having read all the subtleties on which these worthies set up their idol, I know that papacy is nothing but the reign of Babylon and the violence of the mighty hunter Nimrod. I therefore request all my friends and all booksellers that they will burn the books I have before written on this subject, and in their stead substitute this single proposition, quote, the papacy is a general chase led by the Bishop of Rome and having for its object the snaring and ruining of souls, unquote. Page 462, History of Romanism by the great John Dowling, wrote it in 1845. So you have Luther rightfully attacking the papacy. You have these Protestant men of God attacking the papacy, calling it Antichrist and Babylonian and never Christian. So for the Jesuits, in their counter-Reformation designs, remember, they are brought into the papacy in 1540 by Paul III. They immediately go on the attack against Martin Luther. They want to destroy him. But they attack him. They call him a filthy pig and a host of other things. In 1550, the Pope issues his Edict of 1550 that calls for anybody who reads the work of that heretic Martin Luther for the women to be buried alive and for the men to be burnt alive. That's the Pope's Edict of 1550. It's the same papacy of today. They hated Lutherans. They hated the Luther Bible. They hated the man who broke the political power of the Pope of Rome. And so much so that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, would resign as the Holy Roman Emperor and enter into a monastery and plant gardens from then on. So the Jesuits had to attack Luther, but they waited. They waited throughout the end of the 1500s, throughout the 1600s, throughout the 1700s. Remember, there's no evidence at all that the Jews and their lives was written during those 2 centuries. Not one anti-Semite or those hating the Jews quoted one word from that book because it doesn't exist until 1883, as I covered in some previous broadcasts. We have to portray Luther as the hater of the Jews. And then we have to use this work that it's going to be a fraud. It's going to be something that we're going to attribute to him that we wrote. So we can unite Germany to persecute the Jews and kill them out of the Pale of Settlement and use Stalin and Hitler for the same purpose. And we'll use FDR and Churchill to help them out, all working together. We control all those dictators. So the Jesuits then, I'll go to Luther first. Here's what Luther had to say about the papacy in the book. This is Lenker's translation of Luther's works, and there's in 7 volumes. Complete Sermons of Martin Luther, Volume 1. Page 217, we read, Christ and the Scriptures are not necessary as long as the doctrine of the Pope and his schools exist. Therefore, I have said that Pope, bishops, and schools are not good enough to be heretics, but they surpass all heretics and are the dregs of all heresies, errors, and idolatry from the beginning, because they entirely suppress Christ and the Word of God, and only retain their names for appearance's sake. This no idolater, no heretic, no Jew has ever done, not even the Turk with all his violent acts. And although the heathen were without the Scriptures and without Christ before his birth, yet they did not oppose him and the Scriptures as these do, as these priests and popes and bishops and their schools do. Therefore, they were far better than the papists. So all these others, the Turks, the Jews, the heretics, the idolaters, all these people in their pagan nation lands are better than the papists. Do you see how the forefront of his attack is against the papists and not the Jews? And for Luther to have written on the Jews and their lies in 1543 would have been a complete and total repudiation of everything he ever wrote, everything he ever stood for. And by the way, one of the things that he wrote that was being assembled, all his sermons, is called the Church Postil. I read to you from the editor's introduction, and this is Nicholas Lenker, who wrote this in 1905. He writes nothing of anything that Luther ever put together called on the Jews of their lies. You'll find none of it in Lenker's work. That he wrote this. He was an American Lutheran, and he put together all of Luther's sermons and he translated them into English. So we read, the Church Postil, which Luther himself considered the best of all his works, was called forth by the exigency and need of the church at the time. The majority of the preachers in those days were incapable of working out their own sermons and were satisfied in reading the epistle and gospel lessons, and perhaps besides, they read a sermon of another preacher to the congregation. The sermons for this purpose were those by Tauler, T-A-U-L-E-R, which was a Catholic priest, and Geiler, who was another Catholic priest, 1510. But since the latter were not in all parts evangelical, yet they were not saved, Luther concluded he would himself write an explanation of the pericopes of the church year and place the same in the hands of the preachers for their use. This Luther did not only because the preachers were so incompetent, but also in order to prevent the work of the fanatics and the sects, never, however, in order to encourage preachers in their laziness to take their sermons from his and other good books, and then never pray, never study, and never read, and never search the Scriptures. The occasion for writing this work, Luther's Church Postil, was given by the Elector Frederick the Wise, the one who protected Luther from being taken to Rome and murdered and killed by the Inquisition. Frederick the Wise, requesting Luther in 1520 to prepare a postil for all the Sundays, especially for the season before Easter. At the same time, he desired thereby to draw Luther from his many disputes to the positive teaching of the gospel, and this Luther knew. In 1521, his Advent postil appeared at Wittenberg in Latin. Remember, Luther knew Hebrew, Greek, Latin, German, and maybe another language I'm not aware of. It was translated at once into German, but not by Luther, and it appeared in 1522 under the title, quote, Pastille or Explanation of the Epistles and Gospels for Advent, unquote. Interrupted by his journey to Worms, Luther resumed the work on the Wartburg, there's a Wartburg Castle, and labored there on the Christmas sermons. He was again interrupted by the Karlstadt disorder. September 15th, 17th, 1521. However, the Pastille was finished to Epiphany. This second part was, quote, completed in the desert, that's on the Wartburg, when Luther was Knight George there, protected by Frederick the Elector. He was doing his translating for the Luther Bible. St. Elizabeth Day, November 21st, 1521. With it appeared that classic document, quote, a short instruction as to what we are to seek and expect in the gospel, unquote. In 1525, the sermons from Epiphany to Easter appeared. Bucer, B-U-C-E-R, translated this winter pastille into Latin for the Friends of the Gospel in Italy, which appeared in 5 books in Strasbourg, 1525 to 1527. The complete Latin pastille was issued in 1530 and 1535 in Strasbourg, and a new edition in 1617 in Frankfurt. Now bear with me now. Collections of sermons for the summer season and for the church festivals were early issued, which were latter embodied in the church pastille. They were, number 1, 14 fine Christian sermons preached at Wittenberg in 1522. Also, quote, the use we are to make of the sufferings of Christ, Basel 1523. Number 2, 27 sermons, Strasbourg 1523. Number 3, 13 sermons, 1523, a supplement to the 27 sermons. 4, 12 sermons for certain festivals of the saints, 1524. Zwickau added the summer pastille and the pastille for the chief festivals, which were printed in Wittenberg in 1527, along with Bugenhagen's summaries translated from the Latin. Here the epistles were omitted. In 1528, he also prepared a new edition of the winter pastille, further revised by Luther. These 3 books, prepared by Rodt, R-O-D-T, were reissued at Wittenberg in 1527, 1528, 1529, 1530, 1531, 1532, 1533, and 1535. The winter pastille 9 times, the summer pastille 8 times, the festival pastille 4 times. In his editorial work, Rodt omitted some and added other material. Now and then he united 2 sermons into one and divided one into 2 sermons. For this, Frederick Franke no doubt criticized him too severely. True, later Luther was not fully satisfied with Rodt's, as R-O-D-T'-S, Rodt's work, but he was not pleased with his own, and hence he continually corrected it. According to Luther's opinion, Rodt corrected too little. Kreuziger was appointed by Luther to prepare a new edition of the pastille with many marked changes. Now listen to this. This Kreuziger is very important. He was contemporary with Luther, and Luther is going to be bringing his church pastille to its highest point at this time. Let's see when it happened. Paragraph 3. In an essentially changed form, the church pastille, these Luther's works, was edited by Kreuziger at the close of Luther's life work from 1540 to 1544. It was again issued in 1543. So Martin Luther revised his church pastille in 1543-1544, the supposed time he was writing on the Jews and their lies in 1543. This is why it was never written in 1543. It was never written for 200 years until the Jesuits, with their huge attack in 1883, attributed this forgery to Martin Luther. And every Jew and all these apostate Protestants keep repeating it, when it was actually impossible for it to be done in 1543, according to Lenker's work on Luther. May us return to the Reformation Bible. May we return to call the papacy the dynasty of the Antichrist. And may we return to the great works of our reformers, Martin Luther being one of them. With Eric John Phelps, back in a moment. 24/7 World Radio.